it's time for our next panel, the Planeswalker's Tales. So, I want to hear you cheer for your host here today, Sam from Ristic Studies. Take it away.
Hey, everyone. Hello and welcome to Planeswalker Tales of Modern Horizons 3. I am Sam, I'm your host from Ristic Studies. And today we're looking all fully in depth at all 5 of the Planeswalkers for Modern Horizons 3. These are the Flip Planeswalkers. And joining me, of course, are 3 members from Wizards of the Coast. Each of them have very specific roles in forming the Planeswalkers that you see. And I'm so excited for them to join me on the stage. So please give a warm round of applause to my 3 panelists from Wizards of the Coast. Okay, I'd like to introduce you first to my left from yesterday in the same position. This is Lauren Bonds, a narrative designer at Wizards of the Coast. And next to Lauren is Matt Cavada. He is an art director, primarily with Universes Beyond. And before that, he was a longtime Magic illustrator, one of my favorites from those middle years. And next to Matt, of course, is Carmen Complarens, who is a game designer at Wizards of the Coast and had one of the main shaping hands for Modern Horizons 3. So each of them are speaking from a totally different perspective, but together they all work to create every single card in the set. But first, we're going to start with a very open-ended question. You all work with Planeswalkers in totally different roles. Lauren, what is your favorite part about working with Planeswalkers?
Yeah, Planeswalkers they're kind of our long-term characters, so we get to see them change set over set. Because Magic is all about visiting different planes, seeing new settings, oftentimes our legendary characters don't have the same sort of follow-through. We won't necessarily see someone from Eldraine in the next setting, but our Planeswalkers can really traverse across that. And so throughout our stories, we can see their growth, their change, their struggles, their triumphs, their falls, and really dig deep into story.
Wonderful. And Matt, from a perspective of an art director, what do you see in Planeswalkers?
The part that I like the most is the challenge of Planeswalkers being a known quantity. When we create new characters, we have responsibilities to each other, like, oh, let's make Marshmallow Planeswalker really soft and white.
Okay, but let's make Marshmallow Planeswalker.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Right there.
But with Planeswalkers, y'all know about them, and we have a responsibility also to deliver on your expectations and then give you a little bit of surprise on top of that, and I've always enjoyed that challenge.
Cool. And how about from game design, Carmen?
So one of the things that's really cool about Planeswalkers as a game designer is they're just some of the most dynamic game pieces we have, right? A lot of times creatures are the things that can attack and block, but Planeswalkers, you can have this whole scripted scene of you plus and then you ultimate it, or it can be a slower value engine that maybe doesn't even have an ultimate, or it dictates how combat works. There are just so many different ways you can actually design a Planeswalker, and I think getting to explore that space is just one of the best parts of the job in general.
So on the screen are the 5 special guests that flew in from the multiverse. I can't believe I forgot to introduce the most important part of this panel. So please give the loudest round of applause to the 5 Planeswalkers here in Amsterdam. Rich Hagon, I love you. I'm so sorry. Okay. First thing we're going to do is take a look specifically at Sorin. We're starting with Sorin, and one of the main elements that we can achieve with a Planeswalker is develop a really long backstory. They're really developed characters because they show up so often. And you love kind of working with this area. What can you tell me about Sorin, his character, and what it's like to shape his character?
Sorin is, on the surface, a moody vampire. And that is, if that's all you take away from him, like, cool, awesome. But he has a very, one of our oldest Planeswalkers, both, in terms of how long he's been in the game, but also literally in his actual age. And the first time we see him is sort of fascinatingly out of context, because he's not on Innistrad. He's not in a vampire plane. He's on Tarkir, and he's looking for Ugin. And that sort of quest that he's on to help stop the Eldrazi, it already implies all of this history that he has. Like, how did he end up here? Why is he here? And then we kind of see him eventually going back to Innistrad, wrestling with the obligations of being part of the Markov family, and eventually creating Avacyn, and trying to sort of find balance in this plane that is inherently hostile to humans, which is fun. Innistrad, not a place I want to vacation. And also his sort of interactions and dynamics with Nahiri just shifting over time, going from allies to eventually being these sort of dire enemies, trapping her in the Hella Vault, and holding on to this grudge for a really long time. And currently where we see him in the story is this sort of dealing with grief. Like, really, that's where he's at this point in his life. Like, he's been around for 1,000 years, and his father is a terrible person. And so when we see him in Crimson Vow, he's trying to figure out what it means to have lost Avacyn, his creation, to have not be estranged entirely from his family. And that is a very complex story that's not even his whole life. And I think that's one of the cool parts that we see, like in where we are showing him in his youngest form. We can go back and dig into even more of that history.
And he's also a Planeswalker that shows up quite a bit on other cards that aren't Planeswalker cards. You might know him from a couple of instants or sorceries. We've highlighted a few here, but Lauren, these are big moments as well for his history and his past.
Right. I think, again, that piece, like with Planeswalkers, they have often very big presences in our story, so we want to show them off on cards. They also have really consistent visual designs, which is very helpful when you have a static snapshot to be able to kind of convey something immediately. So, like, for example, in this one, it's the bitter revelation where he realizes that Ugin's gone. Probably his most intense moment in Anguished Unmaking, which is where he unmakes Avacyn, and this is like that culmination of the arc. And then even to the point where we have him in single combat from War of the Spark. Thank you. Ooh, I was like, Guilds of Ravnica? No.
You're doing great.
and that's that point where he's held on to this grudge. Like, and honestly, I mean, if you live for 1,000 years, you probably learn to hold on to a grudge, or you learn how to let go. She clearly is not. But we get to kind of showcase these very distinctive characters, and in this clear snapshot, you know who this is and why they're there.
Yeah. And then, of course, him kind of dealing with the same sort of fate with Nahiri.
Yeah, and Nahiri also gets to be a character that we kind of show, and so when you put them together on a card, you're like, huh, yeah, we know where this story is, we've seen them before, but now we get to see them now and understand what's happening to them in that moment.
Matt, are you a Sorin fan, would you say?
I am, but not for any of the reasons Lauren was talking about.
He's very moody.
I've been a fan of Sorin for a long time. In fact, the art that's on the screen here has been my favorite Sorin art going on 10 years. It's defeated all comers.
It's so good.
Yeah, it is awesome. Michael Komark is a master. But the reason that I like it is somewhat superficial. I am a big fan of his sweet heavy metal hairdo. I have some jealousy in that area. Also, funny story, he looks like my brother. Like, he legitimately looks like my brother. So when I first saw this art, I was like, oh my God, why am I liking this so much?
Does he know Michael Komark?
He does not. He does
like,
not.
it's not a vanity card.
Yeah.
They share a name, but that's as far as it goes. Yeah, but anyway, this art is fantastic. It does all the things that a wonderful piece of art does, including hinting at a little bit of story. Like the fact that he could have just been standing there looking awesome with his sweet hair, but that little bit of wiping of the blade. Like, he isn't just here because he looks good, he can also take people down.
Komark's just such a master. He's
Yeah.
like my favorite Magic artist.
He is a heavyweight, that is for certain.
Wonderful. And Carmen, on the game design side, what about Sorin attracts you, and what do you see in that character?
Saying Sorin's cool just feels like a real flattening of a lot of stuff, but in general, vampirism is just one of the sort of bendier black spaces that we actually get to tap into a lot, where it's a bunch of stuff that it is right on the edges of Black's color pie, so you get a lot of really cool stuff. And one of the ways that we've used that is to sort of inject power into previous archetypes. We saw this with Sorin, Imperious Bloodlord, when it was in Standard, and recently in Pioneer. But originally, the plan was that it was going to kind of revitalize some of the Ixalan vampire stuff that wasn't quite up to snuff anymore, but we wanted to give it a last hurrah before a lot of that stuff rotated. And even outside of the 60 card side, over on the 100 card side, you have the OG, actual Sorin Markov, Michael Komark again. You could see that target player's life total becomes 10. When you start at 40 life, that is so much more impactful. And in Commander, that's where you see people actually hit like 100 life, right? So being able to say it does not matter what you are at, 10 was just so powerful. And you could just see so much cool stuff in that space.
And how about the new Sorin? Because it has such a thorough history, what do you see in this new version here?
So this is one that's actually in a really similar spot to Imperious Bloodlord, where in Modern Horizons 3, we really wanted a lot of the Planeswalkers to be more about building around stuff rather than just sort of something more generic. So this is one that we actually wanted to hook into life gain decks that we knew people like. A lot of people have sort of had some sort of Soul Sisters deck at some point, or they use Nourishing Shoal or Martyr of Sands or some big way to gain a bunch of life. And we were able to kind of tap into that and then do something that felt true to the character, where between the food and the minus ability on Sorin itself, you would be able to build a lightning helix.
You said food.
Okay.
Very tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah,
this is so funny.
It's one of my, okay, so originally, peek behind the curtain, we actually have to commission art for all of the different tokens, which is just something you don't really have to think of, except we didn't have food in this set originally, and while working on the Sorin, we thought, well, we think food would be a route at the right spot, and how is exactly Sorin going to be the food token? In a meeting, I literally just went, I don't know, what if it was just a guy? Like, just a dude with, like, the bite mark. Is that going to work? And Michael Majors, the set lead, just was like, I'll check. And I think the creative department did an amazing job concepting this one.
It is something I really enjoy, because tokens they're functional game pieces, but they don't tend to have a lot of text on them.
They communicate so much, all in the art.
They do, and so we can really do fun things. Like we had the ones from LTR, which was like a goblin wrapped in spider web, and I was like, yeah, that's a food token. That tracks. And I love trying unique and original, and also in-world things when you have art for tokens.
Just a clever staging and sequencing of the different layers here with the candle kind of blocking out the eyes. It's very suggestive.
He's just taking a nap.
Just a nap, right. Yeah, good.
Maybe is going to be a vampire later and not get eaten, right?
Right. Cool. So that's Sorin. Next up is Ral. Lauren, you have a bit of an unusual take on Ral.
Okay, so I came to really enjoy Ral as a character actually through his arena voice lines, because he has a lot of puns and a lot of dad jokes. And it turns out I am just amused by those things. And so that's when I decided Ral's cool. I like Ral. So I think of him as our dad joke planeswalker. That's not necessarily what he is, but that's the vibe that he gives off. So, on that less serious end, that's definitely what is appealing to me. One of the other things that I personally really enjoy about Ral is he is one of our queer characters, and he's also one that has had a happy ending, like has a story where he didn't die and he didn't lose his and
it's complicated, like died,
What is death but another adventure that Liliana can raise you from?
It's a whole thing.
Currently, he's alive and married happily with his husband.
Yay!
And actually, so for the Pride Secret Lair drop, which I was the producer on and my wife was the art director, like this was a moment that we really wanted to capture. We were like, you know what? I am like to imagine that amongst the guilds, they like revealed that they were dating to everyone, and everyone was like, yeah, we knew.
Okay.
And wins the wedding, and am I invited? And so, we get to see all of the characters from Ravnica around them and really just kind of have that celebration moment with this character. And so that's definitely like one of the pieces that really I've always appreciated about Ral.
How awesome is it that that moment, the tenderness and specialness was captured so expertly in this art? I believe this is Kieran Yanner who
Kieran
painted
Yanner,
this.
who had also just gotten married to his
Yeah,
husband,
it's
like shortly before we
The
commissioned
Gestalt,
that piece.
everything was coming
There's
together.
there's so many just like little subtle things, like the lean, the hand.
By the way, Kieran's in the other room.
Yeah,
Go see him.
Yeah, go
tell
say
him it's
hi.
cool.
Buy his things. Support your artists.
Yeah.
So why are we coming back to Ral now then?
So some of it is he's kind of our prototypical is-it character. So when MH3 is looking for planeswalkers, like he's definitely the one that we'd want to showcase as a red and blue. He's also coming up in our story. I think we have revealed his otter art from Bloomburrow, and so he's definitely part of our current story arc. So it's really nice when even in these I'd say temporally agnostic sets like MH3, we can still reference characters that you're going to see when you're playing our sets that kind of take place in a more linear timeline.
Wibbly wobbly.
It truly is.
Yeah.
Time travel. Don't do it, kids. It's dangerous.
And Carmen, what's happening here mechanically on this card?
So Ral is a little bit blue and red, right? Is it mage? We all old hat, we know. In this set, though, we really wanted to kind of push the red side of things because Ral obviously wants to learn things. That's very blue about him. But what is red about him is that he's not risk averse. He's very willing to do big things in the name of science, right? Like you have to kind of push the boundaries of what we think is true in order to learn what can be true. And that is just what he lives and temporarily dies by.
What are you trying to do?
No, I'm not trying. What is he trying to do? Don't put this is not on me.
Yeah.
So this is one where we really wanted to try and fit that push your luck element onto the card itself. So we have this sort of coin flipping. Maybe you get a planeswalker, maybe you don't. Maybe you take some damage and get a little burned on the way. Maybe you immediately flip it if you want to kind of lock in that you're going to get a planeswalker, or if you really want to do what Ral would do in the name of science, then you can keep casting spells, keep flipping coins, and end up with a more powerful planeswalker, which just felt like it was an absolute home run flavor-wise for the story that we wanted to tell.
And when you're designing planeswalkers, I think there's this beautiful, very narrow window of between virtually unplayable, let's say, and completely broken, and you really want that narrow spot. What else do you look for when you're designing planeswalkers?
So in general, we just really want to make sure that, obviously, the power level matters a lot. Like, we care so much more about telling those stories, right? With planeswalkers in particular, we do want to hit those story beats. We want them to be true to the characters, especially when we're doing it again. Like, I can make any card strong. You make it cost 1, and then you make the text box numbers bigger. It's not that hard. What I care a lot about is making sure that if you were to say, cover up the art and name, then you could probably feel out, if you're a big Magic fan, what it is. Like, one of my favorite cards that I've worked on is the Phyrexianized Vraska from All Will Be One. So this is one where if you look at all of the abilities, you go, okay, you draw a card and you lose a life. I get it. Oh, it turns creatures into artifacts or to stone. Okay, cool. Oh, it's an ultimate that almost kills you. That is very much in the line of what we have done with Vraska mechanically to kind of represent that, hey, this is what our Gorgon Planeswalker does. So if you covered up the name and art, looked at the text box, you could probably go, oh, Phyrexian Gorgon Vraska.
Don't cover up the art, people.
No, I wouldn't dream of it.
Take my advice.
Sacrilege.
All right, I'm going to do my best Ral impression. Matt, let's talk about a topic that's very top of mind for you. What do you see,
All right, I'm out.
Ral Zarek?
Let's talk about hair. I am intrigued by the journey that his hair takes. That's established in MH3, where we see him without his little white marks on the sides, and it has not been canonically established whether he highlights or if it's an age thing. But I'm a creative person. I like to imagine things, and in my mind, something horrible happened to him. Sort of like you see in the movie Poltergeist, where mom sees the crazy horror and suddenly she's got white streaks in her hair. I feel like this happened to Ral. I'm putting it out there into the world. Maybe one of our writers will want to.
Imagine if he
expand
just,
on that?
What if he got it dyed in Ravnica? I can't. I'm thinking of just like Krinko's Buzz Cutters or whatever. What is the
I mean,
what
it
is the name of the shop?
It is a big city. They probably have salons there.
No doubt. Well, I played Ral 10 years ago, and I like to think I don't dye my hair, okay? I'm following the same path here with these beautiful gray streaks along the side. So, nomen omen, you become your fate, that kind of thing.
Now, I just want to canonically establish this as like a very popular hairstyle in Ravnica.
I love it. Yeah, I belong in Ravnica, so I'm down with it. There's coffee there too, canonically, so I'm at home. Yeah.
That's true.
But I guess the last thing, like, if I'm not hired to play Ral in the upcoming Magic movie, who would you place?
So the upcoming Ravnica movie is called St. Elmo's Lightning.
Good.
And you can see here why. If that isn't Rob Lowe, then I don't know who that is.
Me.
It works, though. It works. I feel like we could bring those two things together.
Tonally, we're taking a total 90-degree down a dark alley here. I'm going to go to Tamiyo. And Carmen, it's absolutely you that I have to point to. Tamiyo's an absolutely important character for you.
Yes.
I'd love to know why.
Tamiyo's my favorite Planeswalker, just as a character. So getting a little ahead of myself here, just personally, her card, Field Researcher, was the very first preview card that I ever got where I love Tamiyo as a character, and so I worked so hard on this article. It ended up landing me my first writing gig with StarCityGames.com. It wasn't on SCG. Anyway, y'all understand, but there are so many points about Tamiyo that I just relate with. She is really into learning, really into her special interests. She's an adoptive mom, and just like, there are so many points with the character that I just can't help but adore and that resonate with me. So actually getting the chance to work on Tamiyo and make her modern power level was a dream come true here.
I think, it's a full circle moment where you started on one side of the aisle, right? Like you said, as a writer, but you also predicted that it would be good in a format, is that right? And then.
Yep, exactly. It was just, there was sort of a degree of like, oh yeah, I think this is going to be strong and standard. It's probably going to make Band Company the best deck. It was a lot the best deck, unfortunately, but time goes on.
Totally, yeah. Tamiyo's a good talking point in the sense of Ral is a success story, but Tamiyo also represents when you have to tell a heavier story, right? So how do you manage telling those deeper stories?
So one of the things as a writer and as a narrative designer is that stories want for consequences. That is a lot of, and consequences can be good and they can also be bad. But that there's some sort of stake to what you are doing, that what is happening in this character's life. Like slice of life is a great genre, not really Magic genre. And so when we think about our characters, death is a pretty heavy consequence. And that is often why characters will die in our stories, and they will be completed, and they will end up with sort of tragic endings, and some will end up with happier endings. And so we've had a number of our characters, and I would also say, like, death is one of those things that a lot of people can relate to. Maybe not everything that happens in our game is something that you will personally encounter in your lifetime, but losing someone you love is something that almost all people, I feel like I can probably say that all people will go through at some point, and that universal sort of emotional experience is something that we can really draw on when we're telling stories to give them depth and resonance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that, the classic quote of with great responsibility, are you ever afraid to pull that trigger? Like, are you afraid to manage
I
kind
think
of the heavy
so.
stuff there?
I know I am, and it's interesting, every writer's a little bit different. I am probably one of the less likely to do terrible things to my characters. I tend to get a little emotionally attached to them. They're all my precious children. But we've definitely had several kind of previously in Magic, and for those characters, like, the decision is not an easy one. So like Jaya, for example, and Gideon and Dak and even Ren, it was sort of like, what is the end of their story arc going to look like? And I think one of the pieces is that it's important, at least for me, is that they don't feel like they're a throwaway. So like, Ren's, for example, like this is huge. Like this is preventing the end of the multiverse. Gideon is sacrificing to save someone else, and I think like that piece that it isn't cheap. Like there's sort of like points that you're spending, and if you kill off a character, you lose them without sort of thoughtfulness, then it can feel very desensitizing. And if you do it too much, it can really like, it's easy to just be like, all right, yeah, someone else is dead, like cool. So you want to find that balance between doing it in a way that feels important and consequential, but not going over or under on your body count.
Even sometimes the uncommon legends can lend space to that as well, right? It's nice to grow up a character, not just always spotlight the 5-star heroes.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, like, so Quintorius is one of my favorite examples. He was our character from Strixhaven. He was an uncommon signpost legend. We wanted to have like characters that we were telling stories about, and then, so fun fact, if to become a Planeswalker, normally you experience some sort of trauma. Sometimes it can be not trauma, and it's like just sort of an emotionally significant event. So there is kind of built into our world this sense that if you are going to become a Planeswalker, something bad's probably going to happen to you at some point. And so a character like Quintorius, this sweet, soft elephant, experiences the tragedy that comes along with the invasion of the multiverse by the Phyrexians, and then sparks into a Planeswalker. And so now he's like a mythic Planeswalker in Ixalan, right? And so we get to see that journey. And then on the other end, we also can have characters like Ruby from Eldraine, who we see throughout our story, who goes through hardship. She's trying to save her brother. She works alongside the other characters in the story. And so we can kind of see them in a larger piece than just their single legendary creature card.
There's something poignant about a temporally agnostic set like Modern Horizons 3, or where we have Tamiyo and it's before the completion, and you get to play in that space again from the mechanical perspective, Carmen. So what's it like kind of going back in time and highlighting Tamiyo at her excellent point?
So one of the things that I loved about getting to work on Tamiyo in this set, outside of everything we've already talked about, is, we knew she had this very tragic ending, like literally cried when she was completed, when she died. Won't lie about any of that. But one of the cool parts, you had said previously, a lot of Planeswalkers spark as a result of trauma. Tamiyo just actually had the biggest, coolest eureka moment ever. So in a lot of ways, it was closer to the joyful space. So we really wanted to represent her learning so much that she ascended to being a higher kind of being. And we thought that was really cool. And a lot of times in our game, that's represented through drawing cards. So we really had to figure out how to balance. We want this cool push for modern thing that also is about drawing cards, but is not too much. We thought investigating was a cool flavor word for the character, especially given that she was on Innistrad during the Shadows over Innistrad era. But on top of all of that, we just really care about the fact that basically she's balanced, she's gathering information through card draw, and unlike someone like Sorin, who can do a bunch of different things, she has to basically be stuck with something like gathering that information.
Yeah. Bummer. As a researcher myself, yes.
Yeah, right.
It's a doomed fate, of course.
Get in the corner and read a book.
That's right, yeah. How about some visual motifs that follow Tamiyo?
Tamiyo is cool in that she runs the same sort of program that a lot of like A-list celebrities do, where they surround themselves with an entourage, and they use that, whether they have their dancers behind them or their muscle behind them, to frame them, to set them off heroically, and to juxtapose the like black-suited bouncers with the sequined like starlet, however you want to frame it up. But Tamiyo is not a people person. Tamiyo is into books and words and information, so she doesn't surround herself with people, but she surrounds herself with her stuff. And the artists and art directors that have worked on Tamiyo from the start have always done such a wonderful job using scrolls and books and pages sort of arrayed around her to set her off as special. Like, this is a special character, this is a special moment. Nothing ever looks mundane because this sort of magical floating arcana is just always there, framing her and catching the light and causing interesting shadows. So there's a lot to play with, and I feel like the artists and art directors have done a really good job pulling that off.
I love the spirals and like just Tamiyo collector of tales, having that just almost like, oh, it almost feels like the powering up energy thing of it's just like, all right, it is about to go down.
Yeah.
There's a decorative quality to it, even though they're literal pages and things she might read. But having those and her flowing outfits, like that's so much like happy space for artists to shape it however they want. And I mean, you can see it in the art on screen.
It just gives it so much depth.
Yeah. Yeah, Chase is awesome. That middle piece is entrancing. Tamiyo has this like ethereal beauty to her. We can 180 to a more visceral beauty, some might say.
Yeah.
Matt,
Nice.
what do you see in
Nicely
a card
done.
like... yeah.
Unaesthetic.
Yeah, exactly. What do you see in a card like Grist from the visual side?
I was just talking to Sam earlier about this, that there is such a wonderful juxtaposition between the grotesque and the beautiful that's happening here. And I imagine there's a word for it. I don't know what that word is, but it should exist. It probably exists. But that's what works for me on this. In both the art that's on the screen and the art that's going to come up here in a moment, you can see that there is beauty in the shapes, in the forms overall, in the colors. But if you look close, it's gross. There are dead things in there, and there's gross bugs in there. And one of the interesting things about this piece of art that's on screen is that when the art director sent the artist this assignment, it simply said something along the lines of, create the queen of bugs and corpses. And from that, the artist extrapolates this sort of tapestry of weird butterflies and dead bugs and things and creates a dress. And I just find that to be so charming and so awesome that the artist sort of yes-anded us. Yes, gave us what we asked for and something we didn't even think to ask for and went even further, and it's freaking awesome.
How does that feel as an AD to receive that email back? You know, you send the assignment out and wait maybe a few
Christmas.
months. Yeah.
It's Christmas. It's awesome. It's actually my favorite part of the whole job. You do all the hard work up front, setting the stage, but when the art comes back, it's so much fun. And when it comes back better than you expected, that's even better.
Yeah.
I think so. I mentioned like a lot of our planeswalkers have very consistent looks. Grist gets to cheat, and that is part of what makes her very, very cool to both concept and get art for, because she can just go to a plane and animate a different bunch of bugs and corpses, and that is also fun in its own way, but still so distinct. Like we will have no other planeswalker that does this, so you will always know it's Grist, even though it is slightly different version of the insects.
I hadn't thought about this before, but there's a thing happening with Grist that happens with Tamiyo, and that is each character gives an artist something flexible.
Yeah.
Whether it's flowy clothes and scrolls, or if it's bugs and bones arrayed however you want, it does provide a very wide runway for an artist to do something magical.
So if Tamiyo's concept is generally a researcher who gathers information and that's expressed with clues mechanically or drawing cards, when you have a high concept like Grist, which is more or less a creature made of a bunch of smaller creatures, how do you translate that into game mechanics?
So Grist is one of the really interesting ones where in a lot of ways you almost have to kind of pull this inanimate concept of a swarm, not literally inanimate, but not something that is as singular as one character, like you would with Ral, with Sorin, or any of the other characters, which is really interesting in a lot of ways. We tried to capture a lot on the Planeswalker with making tokens. We really wanted to switch up the kinds of permanence she was destroying from her original design. That felt a lot like it hit the notes about consumption. And something that's been touched on a bit is her kind of reanimating the dead and being able to use those corpses for our bidding previously was all just direct damage, but we actually had the green color pie counselor on the set team, and she was really interested in kind of exploring some of the new space that green could occupy. So we have this bringing things back as insects on the back of it to just say, it's coming back, but a little bit different, a little bit more insectoid. And on the front, one of the cool things you get to do to unlock such a powerful card on the back is you get to gate it behind something that asks a little bit more synergy of you, or it needs more of a deck building component. In Modern, you actually can reliably do something like this. We've seen Prized Amalgam as an example of something that triggers in a very similar way. So we know players can actually reliably do this. They're not being sent on too hard of a quest, and I think it came out in a really cool way.
Yeah. For you as well, like of the 5 planeswalkers here, there's some pretty strict mechanical definition. You know more or less how they're going to behave, but Grist is more or less a blank slate for you. Is that a challenge? Is that a playground?
It cuts both ways, right? So there are some where there are almost so many printings of the same planeswalker that it ends up being hard for us to come up with something new for them to do. So Chandra, for example, is one where I love the character Chandra. There are only so many things that Red can do. We've made 18 Chandras or something like this, at this point. It's like, well, how many ways can you deal damage to something, flip a card and cast it until end of turn, and so on. Grist getting that blank space and even having this sort of higher, almost something, being the swarm. This is not something any other planeswalker can do. It is harder to actually figure out what that means because it's space that we're not used to working in. But once we figure out what it usually is something that feels unique and cool.
And when I hand you a character that is also a blank slate, more or less, you have the concept and that's it. How do you play in that space? Is it intimidating or like exciting?
In a very similar way, it can go both ways. So Grist is a really interesting one because they were sort of like, she was originally designed by sort of that concept first. Like, we want to make a planeswalker that is a swarm of bugs. And like, what if we throw some corpses in there just to add a little spice? And from there, they kind of built this idea, and then a lot of it came back with the art. And so the original MH2 didn't really have a lot of background. So when they were approaching MH3, there was kind of this need to add more definition because, when you see a character and you're only going to see them once, like, you can leave a lot more holes. But the more you see them, the more you really need to fill those holes in because you want to make sure you have consistency. And so it's always something I like to do when I design characters, when I design legends and planeswalkers and anyone, is to make sure there is still some space. Some of it could be seen as like, I don't want to do it, but it really is, I want to give that space to the next person to work on them. Like, I know when I'm making a character in Magic, I may not be concepting the next time that they show up. I may not be writing that character into fiction. And so making sure that our fiction writers can also add to these characters and bring them to more life. So Grist, on the other hand, had a lot of holes, had a lot to fill in, and was sort of very undefined. And sometimes we want to keep that air of mystery. Like, they still don't have a defined plane that they are from. They could be from anywhere. And that can be sort of fun to leave that mystery in and then find suddenly the right place for them in our fiction and our story. And other times you want to make sure that we sort of very clear on what their abilities are, what they can and can't do, because that also has mechanical implications. So with a character like Grist, for example, it could be easy to be like, oh, they can reanimate. And it's like, well, we actually want to split that very specifically, that they are reanimating corpses because they're puppeting them with a swarm of bugs, which is very different than Liliana reanimating the dead into zombies or something else. And that is sort of our way of kind of working with game design to make sure that why is this green-black planeswalker different from this other green-black planeswalker.
I'm going to create a decree today from henceforth. If you want to describe something viciously, grotesquely gorgeous, We could just call that Grist.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Grist. This
Very
is Grist.
Grist-esque, or a Grist person,
That's
the Grist
nice.
painting. Yeah.
It's a planeswalker. It's a swarm. It's now it's an adjective.
Of course,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Great.
Yes.
All right, that's
contains
very Grist.
multitudes.
It's very Grist. That's very interesting. Yes, very good. Okay, kind of pivoting again. We saved the best for last, the most thoroughly developed planeswalker of the 5. You go from Grist, which is a blank slate, to Ajani, and you have a huge responsibility here because Ajani's been in the game since the beginning of Planeswalker. So how do you tackle that back history and that backlog?
The flip side, when you have a very defined character, is now you have to do a lot of research. I have not read every piece of fiction that we've done, and so a lot of it is when presented with a character, I got to brush up. Like, I need to know who they are, what's important about them, what's happened to them, understand everything that we've defined as canonical, the things that we might have hinted at, and sometimes also sort of doing this weird puzzling of like what the intent was. Like, what were these people 5 years ago before I was working on any of this thinking when they were writing this particular story or this sort of section in our fiction? And so Ajani is really this character that we've kind of seen this whole history of, and we've seen a lot of the different parts of his lifetime. And what we started with in the previous one was kind of him in his very earliest stages. This is the vengeful, kind of avenging his brother, and then we eventually move into his sort of friendship with Elspeth and into Theros, and where we see him now, having been completed in the Phyrexian invasion and wrestling with the other side of friendship, which is, come, join me in the perfection of Phyrexia, and him trying to now, as we move forward, wrestling with that guilt and that sort of internal struggle of, and I think that's the piece of Phyrexia that's so insidious, is that they make you believe what they want you to believe. And so when you are no longer under that, you have to wrestle with the fact that you actually did believe that very truly at one point. And so, yeah, he feels bad.
Yeah.
He needs a hug.
Yeah, he really needs a hug. Matt, how do you see kind of these themes expressed visually over the course of probably 15 years now since the original Lorwyn Planeswalker?
Well, one of the cool things about a character as storied as Ajani is that it's not just that he has a bunch of milestones in the narrative of his development, it's that he performs different roles over the course of that long story. And we've seen Ajani as a leader. We've seen him as a vicious warrior. We've seen him as a wise mentor, like we saw in the previous picture with Elspeth. And we also sometimes see him even as like a healer and a sage. So there is so much like breadth in his character, and it makes it so Ajani art doesn't have a characteristic. Like you could kind of sum up Sorin art as cool. But Ajani's a different story. There's a different vibe across the tens and... Have we done 100 pieces of art of Ajani? We might have.
Yeah, I'd have to go look up how many.
What's that?
Multiple.
Yeah, multiple. The
At
multiple
least one.
arts.
But going back to that very first Ajani even, it seems like there was some hallmarks established there, right, that you've been leading into over the years.
Across all those story moments and all those different roles that he has filled in those stories, there are certain things that remain true so that we can spot Ajani when we see him. And those were established up front expertly by artist Alexei Briclot. You've got just the very basic fact of giant white lion man. Again, I'm obsessed with hair. He doesn't just have a regular lion mane. He's got braids. He wears gold and blue. Like we see those hallmarks reappearing in all of his different iterations. And as if giant white braided lion man wasn't enough, he's got very distinct markings around his eyes, and one of those eyes put out. Like how many things can we establish? It's so awesome that make it so easy to spot Ajani when we see him.
Yeah.
It makes you ask so many questions too, right? You kind of talked about this with Sorin before. We were just like, Okay, there's what happened here?
Right. Yeah, it's like, I don't know if any of y'all have seen the movie Memento, but it's like Ajani's wearing his history on his body.
Very much so.
Super cool.
Yeah. That next slide shows the original Ajani art, if you remember from Lorwyn. Again, it all points back to that. I have to show you after the panel, one of my close friends has a cat, adopted a cat a couple months ago. That is a spitting image of Ajani. It's uncanny. Even the eye, it has one eye. It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's incredible. Adopted it, and again, it looks just like this original depiction. So, you know, art mimics life, mimics art, etc. How do you create a new Ajani? I mean, you've done 18 Chandras, but you've done probably just as many Ajanis. So this must have been difficult.
Yeah, so this is one of the harder ones to make, where in a lot of ways it was just trying to find the sort of space for Ajani that we hadn't already tapped into. And one of the really nice things that we had not done is had Ajani as a creature. And White is very known for doing lots of creature things. So we were able to lean into the story of him and his brother being together and then saying, well, unfortunately, we all know the thing that sparked Ajani was his brother dying. So in Modern, it sounds really easy, like make your creature die. That sounds like something that's just going to happen a lot. It doesn't happen very much. There's a lot of exile removal. Your opponent either has to block it or chump block it or something. So there is almost a secret deck building component where if you want to get Ajani online, you actually do need to play something like Witch's Oven and Cauldron Familiar was something that we did a lot. Or you need to play a lot of other cats like Wild Nakatl, who does actually show up in Modern. This is one where you can tell how much we played with it just by how many little knobs we ended up turning. The fact that you may transform him just sounds like a given where you're just like, well, I could have a Planeswalker. Why would I not want to have a Planeswalker? The answer is if your opponent kills your creature and then can attack your Ajani without you having a blocker, you would probably rather just have the creature Ajani on the table and have a bit more agency in that way. And I don't know, there's just so much going on with this card that ended up being a lot harder than one would think, even once we figured out what the scheme was going to be. We knew it was going to be about him being a leader. We knew it was about him kind of running the pride. That's something that's been the one constant throughout his character.
And you have a narrative element here with the flipping, right, Lauren? So how do you see both sides of this card from storytelling?
So one of the parts, and I think Matt touched on a lot of this with the sort of costuming elements and Ajani really kind of carrying his history with him. One of his pieces is his signature weapon, and now when we show him, he's kind of got the double-ended two-bladed sword axe
Sure.
thing. It's sharp and it hurts things. And in the art, especially on the front side, when he's with his brother, you see both of them, and then that sort of immediately tells you, oh, it kind of connects you forward into what happens with him in his story. One of the other pieces is the way in which we use color pie a lot. And I think that is true of all of these Planeswalkers, is that their front side, being monocolor, kind of tells a narrower facet or shows off kind of who they were in an earlier time in their life. And then in Ajani, and this was also true of his first card, brings that red identity into his color pie. And so we see that now he has gone from being kind of just a leader, part of a community, to also, I'm angry and I want vengeance for what has happened to my brother. And obviously that comes through in his posing and his action as well. And then I think Matt had some comments about their costuming in this one too.
Sure. I'm going to state something that might be obvious, but in case you didn't notice this, one of my favorite parts of this art is Ajani's double-headed sword axe. One side is gold and one side is silver. And up to this point, I don't know that anybody knew what the meaning for that was. It's like C-3PO's one silver leg. What the hell's that about? But this art establishes it because when you see the weapons held by the brothers, each wielding the other brother's color, like that says, oh my God, we are brotherhood. And then when Jazal dies and he puts that weapon together, it's like he's carrying his brother with him. I find that to be super poignant and all captured in just one picture.
Yeah, that's love.
Expertly done creative, whoever did this.
Yeah, it's all mishmash. Okay, rapid fire round to send us home. back to the plains from whence we walked.
They spoiled it already.
Yeah, they spoiled it. Sean, you spoiled it. What's your favorite planeswalker of the 5 and the depiction of that planeswalker? Lauren, go.
I love Grist. I love a weirdo. Like,
Yes.
I recognize they're not maybe the most compelling character in terms of writing a story about them, but they're so different.
Yeah.
They're so different.
It's very grist of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a compliment. Matt, what's your favorite planeswalker of these 5?
I don't know if a favorite is the word I would use, but the one that I appreciate the most is Ajani. The OG Ajani Goldmane. If it wasn't for those first 5 planeswalkers and how they were trailblazing for a space in our game and in our brand, like we wouldn't be up here talking about this stuff. So the A-Train, number 1.
Love it. Beautiful. Carmen? Yes?
It's got to be the Japanese War of the Spark Tamiyo Collector of Tales. This is one that I used it as the card backs on Arena during my pro player days. It's one where it really just kind of does the whole, there's a weapon for every situation or a weapon of knowledge or what have you. And it's just something, I don't know, it just really it pulls me in.
And I think my favorite of these 5 was Ajani Mentor of Heroes by Aaron Miller. I was playing a lot of Standard at this time, and I remember when this card was previewed, reading the ultimate of you gain 100 life felt like impossible. It was the coolest 4 words that were ever printed on a Planeswalker because it was so effective. But again, kind of speaks to the narrative elements here, too. This is his stage where he is mentoring Elspeth, and in this era, it was about bringing up his friends. So you gain 100 life. It was like astounding to read that back in Journey into Nyx. So I got to give it to Aaron Miller. Okay, I need one favor of you. We had our 5 very special guests, but we need to send them home. Could you send them home with a wonderful round of applause, please? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful time. We're about halfway through the con, and next up is the cosplay contest on this stage. I'm going to ask for one more round of applause for my lovely panelists as well from Wizards of the Coast. Thank you for joining me. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.